welcome to the middle round magic. Now, you may be surprised to hear this, but middle round running backs actually win leagues more than middle round wide receivers. So with this in mind, here are 5 mid-round running backs with top 10 upside. Now, believe it or not, since Tony Pollard entered the league in 2019, Ezekiel Elliott actually scores 12% more fantasy points, about 17 points per game compared to 15 points per game when Pollard misses. And credit to Zeke and his agent, he got himself a fat contract. I'm all pro player, $15 million per year. But in terms of the Cowboys as a team, they're going to be heavily incentivized to use him because he has a salary cap hit of over $18 million, $3 million more than any other running back, and it's probably the reason why, in part with Dak's contract, that Amari Cooper is no longer on the Cowboys. But that's not all, because before Zeke got hurt last year, he was actually 6th in fantasy points per game for like the first quarter or so, first 20% of the season. And then in week 4, Zeke was injured and he played his final 13 games, 76% of his games on a torn knee. Now, despite this, Zeke still finished 6th overall amongst running backs in fantasy points and 12th in points per game. So he was still a running back one, 76% of the games though, playing with a torn knee. So here's what this means for you. Elliott is a major value as the 18th running back in drafts. I mean, he did play on the #1 overall offense last year, according to Pro Football Focus in the Cowboys. And per PFF, his offensive line this year projects to be top 10 yet again for like the 7th straight year. Plus, Zeke was still top 10 in broken tackles last year, even with the injured knee. That's impressive. So you could draft him with confidence and you'll feel even better grabbing this next guy. Because Miles Sanders now goes in the 7th round of drafts. He's the 77th pick off the board outside the top 25 backs. And at this point, Sanders is a value. Last year, his carries and his targets, we call that opportunities in fantasy football, he saw 174, which led this backfield in Philadelphia. But now check this out. Sanders scored a whopping big fat 0 times last year. Even though he played on the offense that led the league in rushing touchdowns with 25, again, he was the #1 back in terms of opportunities on the team with the most rushing touchdowns, and he had 0. He was clearly unlucky. And it's not like he was bad last year. He ranked 3rd amongst all the running backs in the league in efficiency. But touchdowns weren't the only spot where he was unlucky. Injuries ended up piling up in 2021 for Miles Sanders. He dealt with both a hand and ankle injury that kept him out for 3 games last year and limited him in another 3. Now, despite all the downsides, this offseason couldn't get any better for Sanders because the Eagles drafted no running backs, and the only back they added so far this offseason was undrafted rookie Kennedy Brooks. And don't get me wrong, Brooks in college at Oklahoma was fantastic. In the 3 seasons he's played, he went over 1,000 yards each time. However, there's a much greater chance that Brooks, as an undrafted rookie, is going to be cut than actually pushed towards running back 1 usage. And the remaining backfield competition isn't that much of a concern. You have Boston Scott, who in 3 years behind Miles Sanders has never taken on more than 32% of the snaps in a season. There's Kenneth Gainwell, who was actually solid as a rookie. He was efficient, but he's smaller and less athletic than Sanders, so it's hard to get him out there as much. And then Jason Huntley only has 19 career touches in the NFL. And like Sanders, this next running back doesn't have any major competition concerns. And that man's name is Breece Hall, who the Jets traded up for in round 2 of this year's NFL draft. And even if you hate running backs getting drafted early, you can't blame the Jets for doing this because they had intel that he was going to get drafted before them, and he tested better at the NFL Combine, so more athletic than Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, who we know are pretty dang good running backs and had a lot of hype coming out. But it doesn't stop here, because Hall was a top 1% college producer of all time. He ended up seeing 147 total yards per game. Think about that. That's fantastic. And that 147 total yards per game includes his true freshman season at 18 years old, where he went over 1,100 yards. Now get this. He had about 17 offers for college from some major schools that you know of in the SEC, and he chose Iowa State because David Montgomery was leaving and he wanted to be that guy. And he came in at 18 years old, as young as you could possibly be in college, and put up over 1,100 yards. Dominant, a monster. Now, perhaps the most impressive piece of Hall is how he improved as a pass catcher. Let me explain. Heading into his junior season and potentially his last year, Hall wanted to become more NFL ready and improve his receiving abilities. Now, how did this turn out for him? Well, he only ended up putting up 56% more receptions, 36 last year, than any other season, and he saw over 60% more targets with a career high 44. He had his best year as a pass catcher. Now let's address some of your concerns at the NFL level. You may be hesitant to take him because of rookie uncertainty. However, Hall is an early declare. He left after his junior season, which normally means the NFL reached out to him and said, "You're ready for the league, don't go back to college." And you may be worried about second-year player Michael Carter, but here's why you shouldn't be. Carter was selected in the 4th round of last year's draft. So the Jets trading up for a second-round running back the following year speaks volumes of what they think of Carter. Plus, Carter is smaller by 15 to 20 pounds and much slower than Hall. Hall is like a top 1% speed player of all time, and Michael Carter here is in the bottom 30% of all time. Now, this next running back goes even later in drafts than Hall. all. It's another Iowa State alumni in David Montgomery, and you shouldn't be concerned about Justin Fields taking away touches from Montgomery. Now here's why. Because Montgomery's opportunity last year was fantastic. He was second in snap share amongst running backs, but specifically for his team, he was fourth in opportunity share. He saw 80% of the targets and touches out of the backfield, meaning that he was getting a lot of volume. Here's another way to look at this. Montgomery's elite workload ends up translating to 21.2 opportunities per game, over 17 carries and about 4 targets. Which, if we compare that to Jonathan Taylor, who obviously is the consensus #1 or #2 overall pick, he's fantastic. He saw 22.5 opportunities per game last year. So this is the type of volume we're talking about for Montgomery. And the workload's likely not going to change in 2022. And that's because the competition isn't threatening. You have Khalil Herbert back there, a second-year player who I believe was fantastic. He was a top 10 graded PFF rusher last year. And when actually given opportunities, when David Montgomery was hurt for this 3.5 to 4 week stretch, he got the full workload. He was getting over 20 overall opportunities per game, and he was cashing in, getting touchdowns, scoring double-digit fantasy points. So we like him as a later round dart throw in case something happens to Montgomery. But if nothing happens to Montgomery and he stays healthy, he's not getting any work. He didn't see over 4 carries if you go through this, or 5 total touches in any other game where David Montgomery was healthy. This is Montgomery's backfield. And the rest of the backfield is not threatening. Tariq Cohen is no longer with this team, and unfortunately for him, he tore his Achilles. And then you have Darrington Evans, who the Titans gave up on. He was like a 3rd round draft pick, and they gave up on him pretty early because he wasn't that great in Tennessee. And Travis Ebner is a 2021 6th round pick. Well, let me tell you something. If you play Dynasty, keep an eye on this Baylor product because he's very fast. He's a good pass catcher. That's basically what he did in college at Baylor, top 20% target share of all time. But like a Kennedy Brooks that we talked about earlier for the Eagles, these types of guys likely aren't taking away running back 1 usage, at least not in year 1. And if I pull up my top 200, I currently have David Montgomery 12 picks higher than consensus. So I believe that he should be going about a round earlier, a top 40 player than he is when he goes outside the top 50 players. And if you want my top 200, my tiers, my rankings, and a whole lot more, the Supreme Cheat Sheet, plus right now a $20 Amazon gift card I'll throw in. You can grab it by clicking the first link in the description and following the 2 simple steps in there. And if you don't like it, I'll refund your $10 minimum deposit, and you can keep the $20 gift card. Yes, you can keep it. So just click the link in the description to learn more. So Montgomery is seen as a boring pick, but has great upside, and similar things can be said for this next guy, and that's Cordell Patterson, that has now fallen to the 9th round. Now, I've been on this network and this YouTube channel before saying Cordell Patterson is not a good pick, but that's when he was a 7th round pick, a 6th round pick. He's now fallen to round 9 in drafts, and at this point, it's hard to ignore the upside. But here's the interesting thing about Patterson. He's not even a running back, but this actually works in our favor. Let's discuss. Patterson saw 9.6 carries per game last year, and if you take out the game where he was injured and all the other players, he ends up ranking 45th in carries per game. 13 backup running backs saw more usage per game than he did. So what this means is he's basically a wide receiver that you get to roster as a running back, and here's why this is exciting. It's exciting because Patterson scored 14.7 fantasy points per game last year, and if you take that and compare it to all the wide receivers, he would have finished top 20 at the position. Yet he currently goes in drafts behind the 49th wide receiver, so he would go as like the 50th wide receiver if that was his position, which is obviously a good value. And now, although mid-round running backs have a better league-winning upside than mid-round wide receivers, it actually flips to wide receivers as you approach round 10, which Patterson is getting close to. And here's why that becomes true. The average running back sees 4.2 yards per carry, while last year's average was 10.9 yards per reception amongst the league, so nearly 3 times as many yards per touch. Plus, if you look back since 2011, so the last decade, 65% of the touchdowns in the league have come via the pass, so there's just more upside as a receiver to both score and pick up yardage. The takeaway here is if you view Patterson as a wide receiver, his age and his overall production starts to look a lot better. Now, these mid-round running backs have league-winning upside and can be considered values, but if you want to see the #1 value on every single NFC team, all 16 teams, then check out this video right here. And you're going to want to open up them earballs and listen closely for when I talk about the 7th player in that video.